Anyway, Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for each and everything that we've done. We thank you for the past wins. We're praying for future wins. We're praying that we understand today's lesson from Shepherd Mona regarding ECG. And we pray that we are able to take up each and everything and implement it in our various businesses. Thank you for each and everything you've done forward. And for us who are in sales, we pray that you help us close the month successfully. In Jesus' mighty name was prayed.
Amen.
Amen. So without further ado, let me please invite our dear Shepherd Mona to take us through governance.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So you're all very welcome back to today's session, where I promised we'd get into boards, because boards are a tool or an integral part of corporate governance, one that oversees corporate governance within institutions and is tasked with oversight. And then we're not here tomorrow, but on Thursday, then we'll get into the two strands of ESG, which are social inclusion and environmental awareness or friendliness. So today, let's complete corporate governance, the governance strand, by looking at the one key tool that is used to implement to ensure that we have sound corporate governance, which is boards. Before we go far, yesterday, as I introduced the topic ESG, one thing that I said that was critical, one key foundation, was having basic systems and structures in place. And for boards to operate effectively, to dispense corporate governance effectively, there's need, especially in family-owned businesses, owned and run businesses, for the founders, the leaders of the organization, to have the maturity and intentionality to embrace corporate governance and to embrace the structures like boards that will support them in delivering this. Without the intentionality, without the maturity, everything that we're speaking about this week might as well be for fun. There's need to embrace it. There's need to be mature about it, and allow people that have not founded your organization, people that have not are not part of your family, people that you're actually paying a board and sitting allowance to govern and help you govern your institution. So that's one thing straight off the bat that must be understood. So getting right into it, boards and what their purpose is really to ensure that the company's prosperity is achieved by collectively directing the company's affairs while meeting the appropriate interests of its shareholders and stakeholders. It used to be just ensuring that shareholders' interests are well taken care of, but lately we're seeing stakeholder is a big thing. Your suppliers have a say, your employees have a say, your clients obviously have a say. And with the proliferation of social media and how things quickly escalate just from a tweet or a comment or an unhappy customer, the easiest example in our recent history and memory is the whole Cafe Java's rat incidents. Suddenly there's more. I don't even know who the shareholders of Cafe Java's are, but then the clients and employees views and perspectives and feelings on this were suddenly very important. So there's need to acknowledge that this is not just for shareholders, but generally stakeholders. And in your businesses, by the way, it's important that you do stakeholder mapping and know who your key stakeholders are, how frequently, what their interests are, and how frequently you must engage them. You probably don't need to engage your suppliers as frequently as you need to engage your customers. And even within your customers, you don't need to engage the 80%, the 80-20 rule. You'll find that in most businesses, your stakeholders, there's the 20% who are responsible for 80% of your revenue. Those are the ones you take time with. So if you don't have a stakeholder map, that is something, an aside that you must also ensure that you have done. Again, history of boards go all the way to the 16th century, again started by the British East Indian Company. And at that time, they were big and bloated. They had, for instance, that particular company had 24 directors. And knowing what we know now and the information I'm going to give you, you'll see that they were really dysfunctional in how they were run and operated. They were inquisitiveness, for instance, was not welcome. And you'll see one of the key features of a board member is being inquisitive, nose in, hands out. And by that, I mean, you're asking all the right questions, you're fishing around for what might be going wrong and trying to understand the business. And hands out means you're letting management manage. So you're not sitting in management meetings, exco meetings, you're allowing for them to only get back to you at a quarterly basis, barring any exceptional interruptions. Expertise and competence was not key at the time. It was who you knew, and it was more about socializing than official matters. So I think boards at that time were the in place to be. They met frequently and demanded hefty pay for meeting and participating and entertaining clients. So it really was a social club, and it was a feel-good club, and I don't think achieved a lot of what they were supposed to do. So enter the 19th century, and we generally became more judicious about directors and what they were supposed to do, being agents of shareholders or trustees. And right now the trend from being a big and bloated board, the trend is to have few board members, typically between 5 and 11. 11 is the maximum. Beyond that, you know, you're now no longer effective. Decision making will be hard. And then appointment is on merit, expertise, and skill. So you have to have a particular skill that you bring, and experience and expertise that you're sought for. Being a generalist is good, and you're not only expected to participate in, say, if you're a lawyer or if you're an auditor, they're not only calling on the audit skill, because the assumption is you're of above average intelligence and can reason on any other thing or topic, say human resources or innovation, without necessarily being an expert, but the particular expertise you bring on board is, say, business development or legal aspects or legal skills. Inquisitiveness is welcome and encouraged, and you have to spend more time on official matters than socializing. And a few meetings encouraged as well, at least once a quarter, as I said, barring exceptional occurrences. There could be a crisis, there could be a hack, there could be a fire, a disaster of sorts, you know, the global financial crisis. Imagine when there was 9/11, that type of thing. Obviously, you'll have to meet beyond the once a quarter. So that's not held or cast in stone, but to a large extent should be adhered to. Otherwise, you're then getting into firefighting mode. And remember, yesterday we talked about one of the typical failures of corporate governance is firefighting. So if you're meeting more than once a quarter, something is amiss and should be corrected. There are typically 3 types of boards: UK boards, which is what we typically have here in Uganda, and it is comprised of non-executive directors and executive directors. The executive directors are the ones that work in the organizations, typically tend to be chief executives, managing directors, or executive directors, actually. And then non-executive directors are indeed people who are not part of the executive, so are not sitting in the organization on a day-to-day, and are still contributing. Enter the maturity I was talking about earlier, that the intentionality to embrace people who are not typically of the business and are typically not owners, but require to be heard and listened to, and their direction listened to as well. So that typically tends to be what a UK board is like. There are various committees on boards. Audit and risk tend to be the common ones, human resources, investments and procurement. But lately, the one that's being introduced is ESG. So now boards typically have an ESG committee. We're also being asked to account for an ESG department or ESG personnel within the organogram, within the staff organograms. I know starting this year, I believe IFRS 9 reporting is going to require reporting from an ESG standard point of view. So whether or not you wanted to embrace ESG, it is here with us going forward. Then the German boards have two-tier systems, a management board and a supervisory board. But what it ends up looking like is it's like a management committee and an exco committee, and then a supervisory board with independent directors who typically don't tend to meet and communicate through a CEO, which is a little different to the UK one. And then the US boards, so there were three, the US boards are very similar to the UK, only that, and I think you've heard of it quite a bit, that the CEO tends to be the chairperson of the board. So that usually makes a CEO a super CEO, which is not encouraged, because that CEO or founder, now in this case, founders of organizations tend to be their own chairpersons, which doesn't bode well with typical corporate governance. And the American systems are starting to undo that slowly. The only institution in Uganda actually where we have that is Bank of Uganda, where the governor of Bank of Uganda actually chairs the board. And with our recently deceased governor, he was quite a dominant character, and what he said goes. So the potential for abuse in that type of system is enormous, and there's need to separate or have a segregation of roles in that regard. So Ugandan boards, we typically follow the UK board systems. And so what are the collective duties of boards of directors? One, setting the corporate strategy and organizational structure. Again, do not be confused that the board sits down and actually writes out the strategy. Typically, management goes back and comes up with a strategy, targets, goals, vision, everything, and presents them to the board for consideration and tweaking. They're typically busy people. And so while it's saying setting corporate strategy, don't think that they are the ones who sit down and do it. They review the plans brought together by management and either decrease, increase, or adjust here and there until then what they approve then becomes a corporate strategy and organizational structure. Appointing and monitoring the CEO and executive management is a key role. Beyond the exco, beyond the chief executive, they don't typically get involved in the hire of then heads of departments and other employees. That is now left to the CEO and the executive. And then succession planning as well for the board and for the executive management is a key role for boards of directors. People should not be leaving in droves or abruptly, and there generally must be a succession plan for continuity. Integrity of accounting and financial reporting. Remember what I was talking about yesterday. When the integrity of data is questioned and or late, there's usually an issue there, so that must be managed or looked into. Conflicts of interest and related party transactions must be overseen and managed by boards. Recall from the Thrive Breakfast meetings, director shared a story on, I believe, was it Nakumat? And part of the problems they faced were related party transactions. I'm aware as well of a fund manager operating in this space who has about 14 companies that they've invested in Uganda at the moment. But the ones that are not performing well are the ones where there are governance problems, but particularly have been brought to their knees due to related party transactions, giving business to sisters and uncles and relatives. And while that in itself is not necessarily bad, there's a tendency to overinflate and not manage costs well and that type of thing, generally conflicts of interest. So a board typically looks out for that, is responsible for board nominations, board and executive management remuneration. Otherwise, we would have a situation that we see in our parliament where the same people who are receiving the pay are the ones determining the pay grade, and everybody always feels underpaid. So you need some moderation in that regard. And for the executive management and the rest of the organization, it comes from a board. And then with boards, they tend to do board surveys so that you're kind of following where the market is, so that you're not underpaying or overpaying and distorting the market. And then monitoring governance practices, obviously, and exercising accountability to the shareholders and responsibility to the various stakeholders. Basic duties of management, that's the CEO, executive committee, and Management Committee, run daily operations, supervise, coach, and train employees, and review organizational performance in terms of financial performance, employee performance, operational performance. So you don't do it. We don't do it typically to just report to the board. It is our duty to ensure that we are living according to the plans and strategies and targets that we set for ourselves. And we must interrogate them first and be satisfied before we even think of reporting to boards and shareholders. So it's one of our core duties. We mustn't live or work as if we're only reporting to the board. It's a core duty. And then a core duty of employees, core duties of employees is to follow the employer's lawful orders, and emphasis there on lawful. If it's unlawful and you still are found implementing unlawful orders, you still might have a case to answer, although there'll be leniency on how able an employee was able to stand up to their bosses. But still, we must be aware of the law so that we're not knowingly or unknowingly led to committing crime or unlawful deeds. Then there's serving faithfully and honestly and obediently, and executing the responsibilities and daily tasks with proper care, due diligence, and skill. Here I must emphasize, employees, we tend to think that we should be paid extra or thanked extra for doing our basic responsibilities. It is nice, the courtesy is nice and everything, but as you see, these are some of our basic responsibilities. A remuneration you agreed to and signed up for is that you do your basic duties with due care, by the way, proper care, diligence, and skill, and accounting for all entrusted resources in the line of duty, company phones, company vehicles, laptops, and what have you. There's need for due care. Leaving laptops in cars and they're stolen is not automatic that the company will replace it without having the participation of the employee in returning that. So due care, proper care is critical. And typical board agendas, I'll get into that, but key board etiquette that we must be aware of. One, keep time. Director the other day told us you can't be on time, you're either late or early. On time, not really. So keep time. The etiquette for management, executive committees, you must be seated at least 10 minutes before your board members. You could sit down with them, but certainly try and ensure that you don't sit after them. You sit before them, you're ahead of them, and you generally keep time. And board members as well are meant to keep time. Circulating the agenda, first with the chairman, the CEO, and the board secretary for consideration. What are we going to discuss in the coming quarter? You don't do it 2 days to the meeting. It is actually done 2 to 3 weeks or even 4 weeks, a month before the board meetings. And typically the chairman of the board has asked his fellow directors. The CEO is expected to have asked the ExCo, and the board secretary is really just there to draft the agenda and keep record of the meetings. But you must discuss this a month before so there are no surprises. And where there's an agenda that has been considered and circulated on time, such meetings do not allow for any other business. That is not allowed in today's professional boards, because AOBs are means by which hijacking of agendas takes place. You don't give people time, and then you bring something substantive that board members have not had time to consider, think about, discuss. And so typically there's no room for AOB. And if AOB should come around, it should be about where is the Christmas party happening? The venue has changed. It better be very light in nature, cannot be anything substantial. And then minutes and matters arising from the meeting that has been held should be shared typically between 2 to 3 weeks after board meetings. Any longer and management is not given an opportunity to execute on some of the things that have been agreed on in the board meetings in a timely manner. So right after board meetings is typically very busy for board secretaries because they have to get the minutes out and the matters arising out quickly. And then the papers that are going to be discussed in a board meeting must be circulated at least between 5 to 7 working days ahead of meetings. Why? You must give board members time to consider the matters that are being brought for discussion, and you can't assume that all they sit around doing is waiting to receive papers from management, and they're sitting on several boards. Some of them are in executive management and have their typical day-to-day work to do. So you need to give them ample time to review board meeting papers, which must be well written, succinct, and your ask must be very clear. One, sometimes if it's just for information, indicate on the paper if it's for information, so that when they're prioritizing how they're reading the papers, for information papers are typically read last. For approval papers are typically read first, and more time is spent on them because that's where the crux of the matter is. Decisions must be made. And be efficient with time. For the longest agenda items, you want to last not more than 20 minutes. A good board chair manages meetings efficiently so that the discussions just don't get prolonged. You must ensure that you're able to whip your board members into shape, because some people can give comments and more comments, especially once there's a typical rule. If your point has been said, one, don't waste time with the sentence that Mona said this point, and I'd just like to add, if there's nothing new to add, it's okay to pass up the invitation to speak. So keep your submissions concise, and a good chair will bring to order long-winded conversations. As I said, the longest board agenda items shouldn't go beyond 20 minutes, but typically you must last 5 to 10 minutes on them. Why? Remember, you received these papers ahead of the meeting, 7 working days. And so when the presenters of the papers come on, it's a case of the assumption is you have read the paper. And I'd just like to add, for instance, that one thing that we may have left out is this or the other, and I'm happy to take the board members' views on this. You don't then read the entire paper again because you have lost then the reason for why you circulated the paper earlier. So that's how indeed substantive matters can be discussed and concluded and dealt away with in about 5 to 10 minutes. As I said, the contentious matters are the ones that typically get to 20 minutes. Typically, board meetings, by the way, don't take a full day. Inefficient boards are the ones that you end up lasting a full day. Ideally, they should be a half a day job. You must make key decisions and key rulings. You can't leave matters hanging. That is why on the paper you must address it and indicate whether it's for approval or for information. And a good chair ensures that key rulings have been made, even on when there are contentious decisions, even when there's a minority stake. There must be a ruling and a decision must be made. You can't remain in limbo. So that's one key thing. If you find that you're not concluding and asking for the matter to be brought back, in subsequent board meetings, there's a governance failure there and there's cowardice, and you can't leave things in limbo. So there's need for courage. Sometimes the decisions are hard, but there's need for courage. For instance, Total is going ahead with supporting us, supporting the country on the ECOP development. I can imagine with all these protests and what have you going in a board meeting like that, there can be quite a bit of hesitation, but at some decision has to be made and you need to follow through on that and hold management accountable to the decisions that have been made. Phones and gadgets must be on silent as a rule. Avoid taking calls within your meetings unless, say, you have a patient who you're monitoring and that type of thing. Those are the kind of exceptions that are made when they allow for walking out to take some calls. Otherwise, you typically catch up on messages and take phone calls during your breaks. And computers as well, laptops, you need to put on silent. Even if you have your laptop in the room, we can't have notification sounds going off that you're receiving emails. Otherwise, it distracts and takes away from the attention within the room. And then you must limit exiting and walking out of meetings because you will not be in the room when key issues and key decisions are made. And sometimes it's a form of cowardice. When contentious matters are coming up, then the cowards will want to walk out so they're not part of the decision. So the whole I drink 2 liters of water a day starts after your board meetings. You can't start a board meeting having drunk a liter of water because, of course, you're going to have to keep taking a toilet break. Which then, and the board meeting minutes indicate that person X walked out of the room at this point, then person X rejoined the meeting at this point, so that when in future we're trying to assess who was in the room, who took this decision, it is important that there was a head count of who took this decision. So again, if a chair notices that type of behavior from management or from board members about walking in and out of rooms when decisions are about to be made, that must be done away with, and at least then call for a break and say, let's come back after 5 minutes, but we all must be in the room to take this decision. Then you must also attend meetings regularly, but as I said, board members, for one reason or the other, might not be able to make it, but absenteeism can be helped by sharing board calendars ahead of the year. In our organization, the board calendars for the subsequent year are shared right now in November. They're actually about to be released so that board members can have their input and diarize. And management is also typically aware of when board meetings are. So we know when we can and cannot take leave. We know when we'll be making or writing our papers, when we'll be needing to submit. So generally, nothing takes you by surprise, as I said, barring exceptional circumstances or emergencies. So because you have planned and and have scheduled these board meetings, you typically should be able to attend all of them, as I said, barring exceptional circumstances. The times when we see difficulty in board members attending meetings is when they are functional executives in other organizations. Something might come up on their end that doesn't permit them. People that are in retirement who tend to be available for board meetings hardly miss board meetings, but you need to have a mix. You can't only have board meetings of retirees. You need to have people who are still in executive management because they bring the day-to-day realities. In a way, they represent management in the board. You might have a retiree who was last in the work space, I don't know how many years ago, and is not, say, familiar with the hot desking principle. Like typically post-COVID, in managing costs, organizations, for instance, are no longer having employees seated in one desk and people are working from home. And if you don't have board members who are aware of that, then it can become an HR issue. Then you must be cautious of time or health refreshment breaks every 2 hours for about 15 to 20 minutes. And so those are typically 2, especially if a meeting is running from 8 to midday or 1. And then you must draw out comments and participation and input from board members. Your job cannot be to be the quiet one. So board members or board chairs are meant to draw out ideas and comments from everybody. Not all the time. Sometimes if you don't have what to say, you don't have what to say, but it can't be your modus operandi that you are the quiet one who hardly has anything, or you agree with what everything has been said and have nothing further to add. That cannot, that would not fly. And in a board evaluation, such people would tend to be dropped or not recommended for other boards. Then you must limit dominance as well. Typically, the chair speaks last because you're dominating, you're the chair of the meeting. So the etiquette is that you speak last and let all the other board members and even management have their say before you speak, as well as rule on a matter. And you must allow for a minority view. And while the majority take the day, if there's a strong minority opinion, you allow for it, and it must be appended to the decision quite clearly. You can't allow for gossip. There must be discretion. And what is discussed in the boardroom stays in the boardroom. Maturity is required. However friendly you are to management, however friendly you are to a particular person or issue that was discussed, you can then not take confidential issues that have been, that's a major breach, and it cannot be tolerated. Sometimes it's cause for almost immediate dismissal. And then you take collective responsibility or decision-making, even though you weren't exactly fully on board with the decision. Sometimes when the collective responsibility will dictate, unless of very strong minority opinions, but if you are light on it and you didn't quite think that management say needed to get a bonus, but everybody has, you can't then go out and start saying, I was against it or I was for it. And it's typically by cowards. So that must be avoided. And then lastly, you must be inquisitive, you must ask questions. We're running out of time, so I won't go through a typical board agenda, but you most probably all know about it. But the only thing that is new that has been introduced in most boards over the last year or so has been a values or people moment, or people and safety moments. One, values, so that there are not charts on the walls. We're, for instance, asked to talk about which values are standing out for us, which have been tested, which have, which are working, which are relevant in a particular quarter. What do we need to know about the people from a safety point of view? We're now making reports about Ebola, where we had to make reports about COVID-19. How often are we getting in touch with our colleagues? And just generally so that we take a pulse check of where the organization is. Perhaps before I get into social inclusion and environmental concerns on Thursday, I will just take us briefly through our typical board agenda before going through those two. So I'd like to stop here and take any questions and comments as might be required. And I'm sorry this took time.
Okay, thank you, Shepherd Mona. Jonan, please keep I'm going to ask us, please keep our questions brief. Try to limit it to under 30 seconds. Investor Jonan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shepherd Mona, for sharing with us. Two questions, brief. To what extent does the board participate in the development, implementation of strategies and plans? To what extent do they participate? Two, given that the board meets once a quarter, most of the time, how do they come to know about the details of the business, how you're escalating the prices, how you're spending a lot on some other costs, and all the other details? How do they come to know? I mean, they meet once a quarter for maybe 2 hours.
Investor, thank you. Maybe Shepherd Mona can help us.
As I mentioned, with the corporate strategy and proposals and plans, management typically starts that discussion. It starts it by presenting what they think are good plans and way forward for the organization to take. And then the board comes in to interrogate the assumptions, to interrogate the targets, because they're widely read. They're from all walks of life, and so they can challenge management on certain things. For instance, we were challenged in our targets for next year. They thought we were being too ambitious in terms of where growth would be on the back of a slowing economy. So, we were asked to consider whether we are being ambitious in terms of the growth prospects, or defend why we think we are going to grow the way we are. So that's where a board comes in to interrogate, but they don't start writing out the assumptions for management and that type of thing. Meeting once a quarter is actually okay, and 3 months will fly by. Remember, Jonan, if you are going to send those papers in 7 working days before, you're taking about, and if they're meaningful papers, you're taking about 2 weeks prior to that, discussing as management the key issues, getting the papers written, refined before you make the submissions. Meeting any more frequent than that means that management will spend its time reporting to the board. And you want to avoid that. Management must be let to do its job, which is usually building the business, bringing in revenue. And so they must be left to provide the relevant information. It's the kind of reports, indeed, that will then get you the kind of information that you need. However, board chairs and CEOs tend to meet frequently, and that is something I personally do. About twice a month, I meet with my board chair, or even if it is required, a lot more sooner. So that is something that the board can keep close to management through the CEO board chair relationship. So that's one way that can be done. But any more frequent management reporting to the board beyond once a quarter means that effectively management is not doing its work by growing the revenue of the organization, and is just reporting to the board.
Okay, thank you, Shepherd Mona. Director, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mona. 2 things. Comment about board members wanting to fire employees. I had one board member chair say he would fire the employee if the employee did this. Number 2, about board members using company resources, cars and access to certain resources. Number 3, I am aware Christmas is coming. How about people getting things for the board members, getting them gifts? Please comment about that. Thank you.
I'll start with the gifts, there should be a gift policy within your organizations, generally even from clients to management, management to the board. There's usually a policy, and I think it's a limit of about $50. You typically don't exceed $50 in value, and management, employees, board members are obliged to say no and return very expensive gifts. Otherwise, there's a risk of judgment being compromised. If, say, the CEO, me, I'm lavishing my chair with very expensive gifts, how is he or she expected to remain objective about me when, say, I need to be brought in order? So you mustn't go overboard, and that will require self-regulation, because sometimes, you know, you're not there when two people are having a conversation and exchanging gifts. So ethics and integrity is key, but there is a policy, and it's usually set at about $50. And if you're found to have accepted a gift over and above that, you can be brought to book. Hiring and firing. One, as I said, the board is limited to the exco. They can hire and fire the exco, the CEO, and the chiefs, and it is based on performance reviews. You don't just wake up willy-nilly and decide that you're going to fire people. There must be a trend. The person you're firing must have received feedback through regular performance appraisals about their performance. Targets must have been given. They must be frequently falling short of those targets. Remedial action, even before you fire, the employer or the board must demonstrate that you gave an opportunity for remedial action to take place and that everything has been done to support. Sometimes you may need to train that employee or that executive or that CEO, get them a coach and everything. So you must go the extra mile to demonstrate that the performance has been reviewed over a period of time, typically 6 months to a year. That's why probation comes in. And where there's weak performance, you must set out what was the problem, remedial time given, remedial action, and there being no further course of action, you then pull the trigger. Many times, by the way, boards and people firing tend to encourage the person they want to fire to resign because you're trying to do away with possible lawsuits. And as I mentioned yesterday, the labor laws and the labor courts will generally be trying to find in favor for the employee. But you tend to come to an agreement where you want to convince the person leaving or the one who's in the bullseye at that point that you don't want this on your record that you are fired. So how about you write a resignation letter? That is typically what tends to happen. But sometimes where there's gross offenses committed, you have no choice. And again, there are procedures. You need to go through disciplinary, information has to be given, and that type of thing. So one, that's why you need to have a very elaborate human resources policy that guides as well. So you can't, those threats are things of the past and do not hold. You dare not even say those kind of things, by the way. You must be polite about it, but still get the job done. Have I answered all the questions? Were they 3? Or were they those 2? My apologies.
Yes, you have.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Shepherd Man, I would just like to hand over to you to close us off in about 1 minute. Our time is ready, 7:39. Thank you so much for delivering knowledge.
Pleasure. And corporate governance is something I'm interested in. I hope this tickles you all to learn more about it in case you haven't. And it's the way of the future. It's the way of succeeding. So a blessed day to all of you. May the good Lord bless your plans and the works of your hands, and may you prosper. And we'll see you bright and early on Thursday morning, and tomorrow is flow prayer. Like director says, do not be a martyr in your business and in your lives. Have a good day.